Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail on April 16, 1963, in response to 8 white clergymen who criticized his civil rights protests in Birmingham, claiming they were unwise and untimely. King defends the need for nonviolent, direct action against segregation, arguing that African Americans cannot wait any longer for justice after centuries of oppression. Justice too long delayed is justice denied. He differentiates between just and unjust laws, asserting a moral duty to disobey unjust ones, supported by historical and biblical examples. King critiques the white moderates as a greater obstacle to freedom than overt segregationists, noting that their preference for a negative peace over true justice. He expresses disappointment in the church for its silence and complicity in upholding the status quo. King emphasizes nonviolent protest as a way to create social tension that prompts necessary dialogue on ignored issues. In conclusion, he calls for unity, understanding, and immediate action against racial injustice, making his letter a powerful defense of civil disobedience and a key text of the civil rights movement.
Throughout Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the theme illustrated is the importance of individuality and inner strength. Emerson encourages self-trust and warns against conforming to societal expectations. He argues that true wisdom and greatness come from following one's own path, thoughts, and instincts rather than relying on external authority or traditions. The passage emphasizes the idea that each individual holds unique potential that can only be unlocked through self-reliance. Emerson champions nonconformity and the courage to speak one's truth, even if misunderstood by others. In essence, greatness arises when a person is true to themselves, resisting the pressures of societal conformity and acting according to their own convictions. Emerson advocates for acting according to one's own nature, independent of societal norms or appearances, believing that genuine actions, even if varied, align with a deeper, unifying force. He emphasizes self-reliance, urging people to follow their instincts and intuition, which are rooted in a divine wisdom shared by all. Emerson argues that self-trust is essential for greatness as it draws upon the power of the soul rather than conforming to societal expectations. Throughout self-reliance, individuals can elevate themselves, leading to a clear understanding of their purpose and connection to the divine.
Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature, 1836, presents his foundational ideas about transcendentalism, the interconnectedness of humanity, and the natural world. The first 3 chapters of Nature explore key themes related to the relationship between humans, nature, and spirituality. In the first chapter, Emerson introduces the idea that nature offers profound spiritual and intellectual renewal. He urges individuals to move away from societal distractions and experience nature directly, as it is through solitude and reflection that humans can connect more deeply with the natural world. Emerson emphasizes that nature is not only a physical reality, but also a reflection of the divine, which can be understood through personal contemplation. In the second chapter, Emerson focuses on the practical, utilitarian benefits of nature, noting that it provides humans with the necessities of life: food, shelter, and resources. However, he argues that nature's material utility is secondary to its deeper spiritual and aesthetic value. While it serves human needs, nature should also be revered for its beauty and ability to elevate the human spirit beyond mere consumption. Finally, Emerson explores nature's aesthetic value, asserting that beauty not only pleases the senses, but also nourishes the soul. He divides beauty into physical, intellectual, and moral forms, claiming that nature's beauty inspires creativity, intellectual insights, and moral virtue. For Emerson, the experience of beauty in nature is a pathway to understanding deeper spiritual truths, further connecting humans to the divine.
In Civil Disobedience, Thoreau presents a compelling argument that emphasizes the primacy of individual conscience over the authority of government. He asserts that governments often overreach, and that people should not passively accept laws that conflict with their moral beliefs. Thoreau criticizes majority rule, arguing that it does not always equate to justice, and instead places moral responsibility on individuals to resist unjust laws such as those that supported slavery for the Mexican-American War. Thoreau's own refusal to pay taxes in protest against these issues led to his brief imprisonment, which he saw as a moral victory rather than a punishment. He believed that just individuals should be willing to face the consequences of their resistance, viewing prison as an honorable place for those opposing injustice. His advocacy for nonviolent resistance laid a foundation for future social movements led by figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., showing that peaceful dissent can be a powerful tool for change. Thoreau's work ultimately challenges readers to prioritize their values over social expectations, inspiring them to take a stand for justice, even when it means defying the law.
How have you connected to self-reliance, and can you relate to it?
So as an English teacher, I am required by my district and my state to teach my students foundational American texts. And I knew right away that I was going to use Emerson, and especially the articles or the essays, Self-Reliance and Nature. So it connects to my life enormously. When I was younger, after I got out of the Navy, I knew I did not want to be a cog in a larger machine. I wanted to be more of an individual, so it really resonated with my personal views and my desires as a young person.
As society and AI continue to advance and develop, how do you think this is going to affect individualism?
So I think that AI is going to undermine, probably sort of disintegrate individualism. First, slowly, and then after a while, it will happen relatively quickly, but in a way that people don't even really notice. In all honesty, we are not as individualistic as we think we are. We love that idea in regards to American identity, but 2024 is very different than 1776 when these foundational ideas were crafted based on the Enlightenment. I'm pretty sure that authors like Yuval Harari are right when they talk about the deterioration of the individual, and it makes me really sad for my students. I really believe that people who are growing up now are going to wind up controlled more by algorithms and computers, by banks, by big tech than they'll be aware of. And they'll think they're individuals when in fact they're really performing and acting like most other people who are affected by those algorithms. AI is not going to be good for the human individual.
Do you agree with Emerson's ideas in self-reliance?
I agree with Emerson's idea the same way I agree with dreams that I've had about what I really wish life was like. In practice, it's just not applicable. We live in a completely different culture, in a completely different century. I tell my students regularly, I would gladly completely destroy the internet if I could push one button and do it. I think people would be better off, but it's not going to happen. So do I agree with his ideas? Sure, the same way I agree with beautiful, wonderful ideas that just aren't going to be applied in our society. The romantic dream of transcendentalism has been dead for a very long time. But it's still a good thing to learn about, so I continue to teach it.
How do you think individuals should respond to inequality?
Well, I think this is exactly how they should respond to inequality, with these non-violent actions. So what he did is very reminiscent of what Gandhi did. I'm reminded of Cesar Chavez. And when you respond to violence without violence, I think you're taken more seriously. Having said that, I think it also takes a great deal of bravery. I agree with everything they did. I don't know that I personally would have been brave enough to do it, because I like harmony. I'm a peacemaker. I don't like conflict, but I support everything that they did.
Do you agree with MLK's response to segregation?
Well, I think he has a beautiful response to segregation. In this letter, he is clearly well written. He is eloquent. He is articulate. And it harkens back to that expression, the pen is mightier than the sword. That is exactly how you respond to this.
Being as you're well-traveled and have experienced diversity, how do you reconcile that with being a teacher and seeing things in the classroom?
So as a Spanish teacher, one of my jobs is to expose students to other cultures and belief systems. And over the years, that has sometimes been a challenge working in a more conservative community. When I led the Global Scholars Program, one of our functions was to help young people see the world's issues through other lenses, not just an American lens. We have to stop thinking of ourselves as American citizens and start thinking of ourselves as citizens of the world. We are all human beings. We have that in common in this shared place. And I think MLK Jr. is coming from a similar place. He's saying this is not a Birmingham issue. This is an American issue. It is larger than that. It is bigger than that. And we have to start looking at issues through the lens of other people.
And do you agree with Thoreau's ideas in the text?
I don't think you want to do anything illegal or immoral, but you do want to make sure that people know that how much you care and how important it is to you. And as I've tried to talk to a lot of my younger peers at work, my nurses, and explaining to them how important it is to make sure they keep their rights. And I think you can do that by voting. And I think the civil discourse is excellent, but it has to be done in the right way, and not through violence, and not through anger, not through hatred, not through pitting people against each other. I think there's always that gray area in the middle. I was a mediator for years, and so there's always a commonality in almost any discussion. You just have to find it. And by anger and by violence, you don't solve anything except creating more anger and more violence. So I think civil discourse is important to our society. That's what we're built on, is being able to agree and disagree, and agree to disagree. It's okay, but to do that in a productive manner. It's so easy to just be angry and hateful. It's a lot harder to actually try to figure it out.
How do you relate the ideas in the text to your personal life?
Well, as I said before, I think I can go back to my high school days and my college days. At that time, women weren't allowed to buy a car without their father signing for it. We couldn't get birth control. Abortion was illegal. Women did not have the rights they have today. You guys have been fruits of our labor. In my generation, every weekend we were marching somewhere, burning bras on the Capitol lawn. And so I was very active in the women's rights movement. We went to Washington, D.C. We marched on the Capitol. And I've always been a very strong woman, in the sense that women should be treated as equally as anyone. And I'm concerned for your generation, because I'm afraid you're losing some of your rights as we speak. We fought so hard for women to have the right to make their own choices about their health, and that's been taken away. And so I still feel very strongly about it, and I probably will be marching again if I have to.
How did you experience and handle civil disobedience as mayor?
We had a public forum component of the city council meetings, and very often that public component where people would get up and speak about things that they were concerned about, issues that were current in the city. One of the big ones was Walmart when it was first coming to town. The two-way streets, they were all one-way downtown, and people felt very passionate about that. And so sometimes they would come to the open forum part of the council meetings, and they would get very disruptive. They would not sit down. They wouldn't stop talking. And you just had, I as the chair, the mayor running the meetings, had to basically, tell them to stop talking and to sit down, and you needed to do that with an authoritative voice. Most people listened. I had a few people that after a while we had to have a police officer there to help with some of that, because I had a couple of people that got very aggressive and got very vulgar, and so we had to shut them down. I didn't like to do that, but in order to really have a good discourse, you can't have that kind of hostility. It has to be done in a tactful manner, and they were not very tactful.
How do you use nature to connect on a deeper level?
So I use nature to connect on a deeper level. I tried to do it almost every day in my life, is just noticing the little things. It can be difficult in this kind of rushed day and age of working and family and everything to make time for nature. But, sometimes it's as little as, observing a bird that flies past my car, and, what species that is, or taking a look at a tree that I drive past on my commute and just seeing how it changes with the seasons. I really try to incorporate that into my life every day. And then on like a more thorough, deeper level, I like to just immerse myself in nature and just kind of put everything, the hustle and bustle of everyday life aside. And it really just fills my soul and regrounds and reconnects me.
How has your spirituality changed because of nature?
So my spirituality has definitely changed because of my experiences in nature. I think it's really easy to feel more connections when you're immersed in nature and feel like there's a greater purpose and a greater force or being or whatever kind of word you want to assign to it at play in kind of tying the world together. So, that's all of the creatures, that's humans, that's, the plants, trees. It's really a beautiful thing, understanding how everything has a purpose and a role on Earth here, and it's what's made the Earth function and life function for so many years.
How do you think humanity should utilize Emerson's ideas about preserving nature?
So I think Emerson was really ahead of his time in understanding that people need nature. And it's crucial and integral to our happiness. We see it now with doctors prescribing as medicine time in nature. And we've gotten away from that, I think, in recent years with industrialization and commodification of, basically all things in society. It's so easy to just go to a supermarket and buy, all of your food, a piece of meat and plastic and, nuts in a bag and forget that came from, a tree and that came from an animal and how important, these other organisms are to our life. And so, tying back in this appreciation of nature that Emerson so eloquently talked about, I think would really be important for humanity as we work to find this balance of, humans and our need to, have jobs and make money and everything else with, an earth that is viable and healthy as well.
How do you relate to this text as someone who experienced racism growing up?
As a kid, I'm very dark complexioned. I'm Korean, but I probably look Hispanic to most people. And I faced a lot of racism when I was a kid. A bunch of us would be hanging out at a coffee shop or an arcade, and the police would single out me and my African-American friends and give us tickets for loitering when they wouldn't give anybody else any problems. And, in the letter, he has a long section about how difficult it is to be Black in America, to try to gain sympathy of people. And a lot of those experiences that he mentioned, I also experienced. So, it really resonated with me. Another thing that really spoke to me was when he talked about peaceful protests, because when I was a kid, I listened to a lot of rap music like Public Enemy and NWA, and they were very angry and probably pro-violence. And as a young man, I thought that was a manly, masculine way to do things. And when I first read the letter he wrote, his reason for peaceful protests is that violence didn't work, and it was purely pragmatic. And it's in the end, it proved that to be right.
Which of Martin Luther King Jr.'s ideas resonates with you the most?
I like his definition of justice, or a just law. He said a law is only just if the people who enact it would be willing to follow it. So back in his day, the white lawmakers liked segregation because they wanted to keep black people out of schools, and the black people would end up going to worse schools. But on the other hand, if things were reversed, they wouldn't segregate their own children from schools that were good, right? So it was an unjust law, and I think it reflects on many things that are happening today. Like you have old white lawmakers legislating reproductive rights for young women. Another example is you have a bunch of old lawmakers again who are probably going to be dead in 10 years making disastrous decisions on global warming. So I think it would be, ideally, the people who would make laws are representative of the people who would follow laws, but that is not the case today.
Why do you think Martin Luther King Jr.'s ideas are relevant in today's world?
In the 60s, I think it was relevant because what happened is the black people protested and the police just came there and beat the crap out of them. And the news covered it and people watched it and they sympathized. And through that sympathy, change happened, which is a good thing. I think if something similar happened today, news organizations would likely focus on isolated incidents of violence. For instance, like, when you have thousands of people protesting and the police are beating the crap out of them, not everyone is going to be disciplined enough to take it. So some people are going to act out. And I think the media would just focus on that because it makes people angry. And instead of showing what really happened, they would show what makes people angry, because what making people angry gets ratings up. So I don't think it would work today.
How have you seen civil disobedience change over time?
Well, from a historical standpoint, it's changed from the time of Thoreau in the 1840s and 1850s to where in the 20th century it is used by Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King. And those are the historical references to that. And both of them have advocated, like Thoreau did, a peaceful civil disobedience.
How should society respond when they disagree with government? Should they conform? Should they protest?
Okay, so in the answer to that, it is basically two things. You have to look at your moral responsibility, what do you believe in as a person, and your individual conscience. Is it something that is something that's going to bother you? So my answer to that is you don't want to conform against things that you believe to be totally wrong. That's where you need to protest. That's where you need to be able to stand up for the rights of other people, because that's the other thing that Thoreau believed, that even though there's the majority, you have to speak up for the rights and the voices of the minority.
Do you agree with Henry David Thoreau's ideas?
Yes, I do. I believe that his essay on civil disobedience stands the test of time. It definitely influenced, like I've mentioned already, Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King, and really the power of the individual to make and elicit change within their society.
How do you use nature to connect on a deeper level?
So, to me, I think connecting to nature on a deeper level is trying to see the realities behind nature and the realities of order, of that goodness, truth, and beauty that Emerson talks about. And that can be in a lot of different ways. It can be through analysis. It can be through taking in the whole. But to me, the best way to understand and to connect with nature deeper is to continue to develop that gratitude for the blessings that we receive through the created order, and that gratitude is really only nurtured and gained through gratitude for redemption, basically. How my hardness of heart and failure to be thankful for all the blessings that we have received has been redeemed through Christ, ultimately for me. And that is sort of the window into greater appreciation for the wonders that are present to us in the natural world.
Do you agree with Emerson's ideas?
I agree with many of them. So, as I mentioned in the last question, I do agree that in the natural realm we can encounter the good, the true, and the beautiful, and therefore have a little picture, a little image of God. And as I said, even though he doesn't talk about gratitude a lot, I do feel that he exemplifies gratitude, and I believe that gratitude is a fitting response to the beauty and the order, the goodness, truth, and the beauty of the natural world. There are several ways in which I find Emerson slightly deficient. So one of the ways that I see him as being slightly deficient is his divorce of the human realm from the natural world. So he says, in order to encounter the natural world and nature, it's best by abstracting yourself from the rest of human intercourse. Like he talks about how various tradesmen or lawyers or workers, in order to encounter this, need to get out of the towns and the villages and things like this. And to a degree, I think he's right insofar as getting away from our normal course of things can draw us out of the complacency that we might otherwise have. But I disagree with him insofar as we ought to be just as enthralled with the everyday. It ought to be enthralling to us to see a mother taking care of a young child. It ought to be enthralling to us and to see a farmer working his fields. Or it ought to be enthralling to us to see a mechanic working on a vehicle, or a student working on a paper, or your mother cooking a meal for you, or your dad helping you ride a bike, or whatever it is, changing a diaper. Those are no less acts of divine goodness and blessing and truth and beauty as anything else. And that's the second place where I find Emerson a little bit deficient, because the goodness and the truth and the beauty in this world, this ought to arouse in us, as I said, gratitude to the one who has given us this goodness and truth and beauty, to the ultimate of goodness and truth and beauty. But what does that do but expose our lack of gratitude? Expose our lack of acknowledgement of the majesty of what God has done. That exposes, the order that we see in the world, that exposes the disorder of our heart. The benevolence of God that ought to rouse us up to thankfulness, but instead so often we're not content with what we have, even though we have so much. The beauty that the Lord has granted us.
How has your relationship with nature shaped your view of religion?
The main point that I guess I'm trying to drive across with this is that we ought to be filled with joy and gratitude every single moment of our lives. We don't have to go out to nature. I think going out into what he would call nature is helpful to do so, but we aren't, and therefore that shows, sort of the deprivation of our own hearts and our need for change, and to, in Christian terms, to be saved.